All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Sports Yak podcast. We're about 3, 4 days away from the draft now. Just wanted to catch up on some of the prospects and some of the intriguing teams that we thought did a good job on draft day. But we got Jon Chepkevich. How are you doing, man?
You having me on, man. It's fun to kind of look back now that the dust has settled and kind of talk through the results of the draft. It was definitely a fun night and a nice little flurry of undrafted free agent maneuvers the following couple of days. Those are always fun too. So happy to join you and talk through some of that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And being in Orlando, I know a lot of people are excited about Paolo Banchero and even Caleb Houston, who was a pretty highly rated prospect out of high school. What were your impressions of him going first and his game, like translating to the NBA?
And all the scuttlebutt, all the noise leading up to the draft after Orlando obviously got won the lottery. It was assumed for a long time that Jabari Smith would be picked number one. That's what I thought was going to happen. Jabari Smith was number one on my personal big board. He's the prospect that I liked the most in the draft, but Banchero, I think, is a perfectly reasonable pick as well. Like those top three guys, even Ivy, those top four are all really exciting prospects. So the Magic ultimately deciding on Banchero, it's kind of a pick your flavor type of thing. I think Banchero will be able to jump in and immediately add a ton of value. He'll be a guy that off the bat should have no problem kind of running an offense, being, both a very dynamic scorer in his own right, shot creator, but also he's a really nice passer for his position. So he'll be able to help orchestrate a lot of things for the Magic right off the bat and should have a good chance at Rookie of the Year.
So there was no really I guess like distinguishing between the three with you. Like obviously you had Jabari first, but like you could see any of the three going first, or any of the four actually.
Yeah, I mean, any of the three, on the whole, just on the value that they might be able to provide, I could understand somebody viewing, one as being the number one overall prospect. For me, it was Jabari, but I'm not gonna fault anyone if they think Paolo is the best prospect. I think that's totally reasonable, and there are reasonable arguments to be made there. Interested to see how this sort of plays out. With the existing roster they have in place, playing alongside Franz and alongside Wendell Carter Jr., and how that all kind of meshes together. But when you're ultimately getting the number one overall pick, you need to just go ahead and pick who you think is the best player in the draft, regardless of fit. It's just one of those things that you kind of figure out later. And, Paolo very well could kind of mesh with those guys well. So we'll see how that all shakes out. Chet Holmgren, number two to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's, a pairing that has been theorized for a while, that people could see that Chet maybe fit the archetype of players that the Thunder seem to be trying to bring in as guys with both size and skill. That seems to be just, what they're going for overall, bring in these intriguing guys with positional size and ball skills and try to just, see how they all mesh together. So that one's fun as well. And then when you're Houston sitting in the third spot, I mean, they were in, a place where the decision was kind of made for them, right? Like the first two come off the board, they're left with the last of the three. And it just so happened to be the guy that I've had number one overall. So I think, they're kind of sitting pretty with Jabari coming in. I think the fit there is pretty seamless because, with Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün being kind of the other two building blocks in place, like young building block pieces, both of those guys are pretty offense oriented. And I think that Jabari just kind of makes sense next to both of them, especially pairing with Şengün, right? Like Şengün and Banchero, as a lot of people thought, would end up being paired together at, if Houston got Banchero at 3 overall, was a little bit clunkier of a fit, I think. Whereas Jabari, I think, is able to provide some more defensive versatility and just kind of makes a little bit more sense next to Şengün and brings a little more defensive value. So, I kind of liked how that ended up shaking out for Houston when it was all said and done.
Yeah, it seems like every team got the guy that fits their team the most. But Hopping back to Paolo just for a second. It seems like his game doesn't have many weaknesses. I think that's why the Magic took him. He just seems to be very all around skilled player. What do you think is his biggest thing to work on?
Biggest question for him would be on the defensive side of the ball, exactly, what does he bring to the table? How scalable is it to eventually playing in high leverage playoff situations? Like, I think he could get there, but it's not like he has some sort of overwhelming wingspan. I think it's maybe 7'1", so only plus a few inches. He's mobile, but he's not like some wizard of switch guy that is going to be able to, lock up point guards. Not that a lot of these big guys are going to be able to do that, but I feel like Jabari has a little bit more already to him on that front defensively, where he's able to move laterally on the perimeter, provide some help side rim protection. I think Banchero can do some of that, but it's just not as clear or evident. So I think kind of continuing to work on those things would go a long way. And then we'll see. I'm a believer in the offensive game. Like, there are some efficiency things to work on. It's like the 3-point shot, I think, looks pure, looks good. I think it'll end up being pretty solid when things are all said and done, but just increasing the efficiency and working on the defensive side of the ball, I guess.
And then for Chet, besides like putting on muscle, which everyone seems to say is like his biggest weakness, he seems like kind of an Evan Mobley type, but with a little bit more offensive skills off the dribble and shooting and stuff. But is that really his only weakness?
Yeah, I think that's the idea for Chet. I think the Thunder were at least rumored to be really interested in Mobley last year, and that they might have been willing to package some picks together to try to go up and get him, but Cleveland obviously just took him, right? So it's not surprising in theory that they went after Chet this year, and that's probably the idea for what they would like him to be. But yeah, as far as his weaknesses or areas to improve, everyone talks about the frame, everyone talks about how he needs to add muscle. Like, yeah, that's obvious. The hope is that he doesn't end up having some of the injury problems that a lot of guys with that kind of build have had historically in time. But I feel like he'll be able to put on some weight. You see skinny guys when they're, 19, 20 years old, put on some good weight. That's totally normal. That's, to be expected. So I think things will be okay on that front. As far as like other weaknesses, I think he does have some, defensive versatility to his game, but you do every once in a while see him get cooked out on the perimeter by like Jalen Williams, for example, who's now his teammate from Santa Clara, like kind of was able to cook him in isolation once he got him on an island. And, I think, again, that's to be expected because he's one of these kind of gawkily built 7-footers, maybe a little higher center of gravity. So, but he is very skilled. He moves well. So I think that could also kind of come in time as he kind of, more.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair. And then, like we said, Jabari is a seamless fit, probably for any team in the NBA. Just like the way he stretches the floor, and like you said, his versatility on defense. The team that everybody likes to hate on, but I feel like is a good fit for Keegan Murray, the Sacramento Kings. I feel like that's just a nice offensive force for them on the wing. What do you think about that?
I've seen Keegan Murray in person a couple of times this year, and during his some of his pre-draft work here in Chicago is where he set up shop. So I was able to go see him, and he shot the ball really well this year, better than people thought, around 39 and change percent from three, I believe. Was probably one of the best, if not the best players in college basketball last year. Took a monumental leap, just kind of a late bloomer. So he's a little bit older than some of these other guys we're talking about right now. He's a sophomore, but did a year of prep school, and I think he's 21 and change, going on 22. So I think he's a little bit more ready-made to contribute than some of the others that might have been in contention for that number 4 pick. Is the idea, right? Like, the Kings seem like they want to win now, and they had a positional need there. So I understand why they were infatuated with Keegan Murray. Jaden Ivey was probably the higher upside pick there, like really explosive, dynamic, future star potential there versus Murray. But I think Murray has some untapped upside in his own right. So I understand why the Kings went with him.
I feel like he just has the most developed game probably out of any of the top four. Maybe that, sometimes you just want the best player right now, and he still has room to grow.
Yeah, I understand that. And I mean, there was some, some maybe the Kings would try to move that pick with the notion that, okay, maybe other teams value Ivy really highly. We might be able to move back a couple picks and still get Murray and, finagle something like that, but, didn't end up actualizing on the day of the draft. So they just said, hey, we're going to go ahead and take our guy. And, people might not agree with it, but that's what we see as being best. So, I understand, how they landed there.
Yeah. And obviously we talked about Ivy, but I mean, some people had him in their top three. Some people had him even, I saw even one or two in some boards. But him and Duran seems to be a great fit next to Cade. They feel like the winners of the draft, like hypothetically, quote unquote, just like immediate reactions. But that it's got to be hyped to see the Pistons now.
I don't disagree with that. I feel like they came out with the two guys that they wanted the whole time, right? Like, I think they had said that, if Ivy had been taken at 4 and then they had their pick at 5, that Duran is who they would have taken. And, it's easy to kind of poke holes in that and say like, oh, they're just saying that because of how things shook out or whatever. But like, there are plenty of people who valued Duran in that range after those top 4. And, I think that those guys make a ton of sense with Cade, like you were alluding to. Like the Ivy fit is just perfect because what Cade is lacking is, the explosive burst, right? He's more of a crafty player, a cerebral player. Ivy is, the natural athletic talent that brings this special explosiveness, special dynamism that you pair next to Cade, and it just makes all the sense in the world. And then, Duran's a pretty freakish athlete in his own right. He looks like he's built like Dwight Howard right now as 18, 19-year-old. So, he looks ready to come and contribute day one, and it's easy to see all those guys meshing together pretty nicely.
Yeah, it probably takes them out of the DeAndre Ayton sweepstakes, but definitely a cheaper option.
Right. I understood the idea of them maybe making a run at DeAndre Ayton, but now that you have Duran, it's just kind of sets the clock back a little bit there, and get a cheaper contract on the books for a few years, can make some other moves around the edges to surround your young core. So I like it. I think they did really well.
And do you think like obviously you think Duran was a good value at 13?
Yeah, 13 at that point, that's great value for Duran. I think everyone sort of expected the Hornets to take one of Duran or Mark Williams to be the center that they've been needing for so long, and to have a lob threat for LaMelo. And, there are some teams that valued Mark Williams more than Duran, some that valued Duran more than Mark Williams. They were like the two top center options. And it just seems that for Charlotte that they liked Mark Williams, and they saw that they would be able to get some additional value for that 13th pick, and knew that the Pistons valued Duran. So it made sense that they were able to make some sort of swap there, and I think it worked out well for both sides. Both sides got what they wanted.
Yeah. It definitely seems like this draft is all like maybe like 3s, 4s, and 5s. Did you get a feeling for that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty pretty lacking draft as far as point guards go, especially. Just not too much in the way of lead guards in this class. And once you get past like guys that are thought to be special point guards or lead guards, like backup point guards are fairly replaceable on the whole. So those guys end up becoming like late first, early second round type guys. And that's kind of how we saw this shake out with, the likes of Ty Washington sliding pretty far, Kennedy Chandler as well. Like those guys ended up, early in the year were thought maybe could be potential lottery type picks, but when it was all said and done, just a weak class on that front. So yeah, definitely a lot of 4s, a lot of 5s, some wings, and that's just sometimes how it shakes out here with how these classes go. But it's not impossible that some of those lead guards taken later end up outperforming your draft slot.
Yeah. So from this point on, it kind of got to whoever the teams, whoever they liked, whoever they favored in terms of the other guys. They seem to be like all in a similar tier. Who do you have ranked after the top 4 or 5?
Yeah, so after those top four, the guys that I really liked were Jeremy Sohan out of Baylor, who ended up going ninth to the Spurs. I think that was a great fit. Dyson Daniels as well, who went eighth to New Orleans. Those are two guys that I love, and I really did like that they both ended up on teams with a really strong track record for developing shooting, because both of those guys bring a ton to the table with defensive versatility and kind of are good connective pieces. And you can see them staying on the floor in high leverage situations in playoff games down the line. But, they both need to improve as shooters, and those teams have two of the best shooting coaches in the NBA. So I was really happy to see both of them land in spots that are kind of a favorable mutual fit for team and player.
Yeah. There's the same type of wings that I guess have a lot of length, 6'7", 6'9", can do a lot of things on the court, which, I guess that's what the NBA is trending towards. But I guess two of those guys
Yeah, totally.
yeah, I guess the two of the guys that are a little bit smaller are Mathurin and Sharp. Were you surprised I guess Mathurin was kind of rising towards draft day, but were you surprised to see him go at 6?
I wouldn't say I was surprised. That kind of seemed to be where things were trending. It was known that Indiana really liked him, and that Mathurin had been kind of killing the workout trail in the pre-draft process, just like bringing a competitive edge, interviewing well, just kind of just making the most of all of those opportunities, working out with these teams, Indiana being one of them. So, I'm not surprised to see that one. I didn't have him valued that highly, but, he's a top 10 guy, lottery level guy. And so, I didn't think it was unreasonable for him to be picked there, and not necessarily who I would have had 6, but I think he's going to be a really nice NBA player when it's all said and done.
So from like 7 to like 15 or 16, did you have them all in a similar tier?
I mean, like I was saying, I like Dyson Daniels and Jeremy Sohan, as well as Johnny Davis. I think I'm pretty high on Johnny Davis. Saw him a few times this year, and I think some of his year was clouded with some injuries that he was just playing through, where some of the inefficiencies came from, and the context of his role, where he took on this really high usage burden on a team that didn't have any other real creation threats on the roster. So oftentimes he was forced to take some tough shots in that situation. But I think he's a guy, I liked his landing spot in Washington as well. He can kind of play a little bit more off the ball next to Bradley Beal, and I think he'll kind of thrive in that environment. So I really liked all of those guys who all went in the lottery there. They were kind of my next cluster of guys that I really valued in this draft.
And then probably the most confusing guy in the draft, at least in the top 15 or top 10, was probably Shaedon Sharpe. Did you ever get a chance to see him in person, or was it just all kind of like high school tape?
I did get to see him in person back at the Made Hoops Midwest Mania event in April of 2021. Okay. So while he was kind of in the course of making his ascent up the high school recruiting rankings. I think at that time, it was like some of the first few events off of the COVID hiatus, and he was known as a potentially high-end recruit. But when he came back from the COVID break, he had grown a little bit, gotten stronger and more explosive. And that event that I was at was like one of his coming out party type events, where he just came out and it became evident that he was one of the most NBA upside type players in the gym. At the time, I think he was still like in the 70s from an RSCI perspective, which sometimes gets a little bit warped because some guys, or some of the consensus recruiting sites that flow into that, there's differences in the timing of when they update their stuff. And so I think he was thought of a little more highly than that, but he really shot up to being eventually the number 1 guy in the class. So I did get to see him there. I got to see him at his pro day as well in Chicago during Combine Week. Uh, so seeing him a few times I think is more than a lot have. So the upside there is definitely tantalizing, but I understand that there's a lot of questions and not having any sample of him in college, just relying on the AAU stuff and seeing him in workouts and everything. But didn't think it was unreasonable for him to get picked at 7. I figured that was kind of the front end of his range. Once the dust settled, I thought he was going to be somewhere between 7 and 11 or so. Ends up going 7, and it's an interesting swing for Portland.
And Mike Schmitz has probably seen him the most out of anybody, so it kind of makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's fair. That's fair. I'm sure that they relied, heavily upon his expertise there in making that kind of pick, right? Like you want to be as confident as you can be, and having someone like Mike recently brought on board is surely helpful, as they were navigating that decision.
Yeah, like you said, you like Daniels, you like Sohan. They're also on like pretty much borderline playoff teams, which probably helps their development a bit, especially Sohan. He's not going to be asked to do much unless they trade DeJounte Murray, which I've actually been seeing rumors of.
Yeah, it's unclear exactly what's going to go on there with Murray and what, but I do like San Antonio's draft overall. Was one of my favorites as well. For them to get Sohan, to get Malachi Branham at 20 was a good value, because he was, thought to be able to maybe sneak into the back end of the lottery, maybe to Cleveland at 14. I think he was maybe 15 or 16 in my consensus ranking. So, getting him at 20, he was one of the sharpest risers throughout the course of the year. Wasn't really necessarily thought to be a one and done type guy. And then, just got better and better and better and was awesome during Big Ten play. So, that was a good get. And then Blake Wesley, I'm a Notre Dame alum. So, that was a fun one for me to see a South Bend local kid that, similar to Shaden Sharp, just people hadn't seen him a while during the COVID hiatus, and he came out from that just a much better player than beforehand. And, Wesley was a top 100 recruit, but still kind of toward the back end of the top 100. Came into Notre Dame, and Notre Dame didn't have any creators, kind of similar to, Johnny Davis at Wisconsin. Blake Wesley, as a true freshman, though, was tasked with being the primary creator for Notre Dame. And, part of that came with a lot of struggles. He had some really tough games, had some really ugly games throughout the course of the year. There was a lot of up and down, but there's a lot of reason to be excited about his potential star upside if he can pull it all together. So for San Antonio to get him, Branham, and Sohan all in the first round, I think that was great draft for them, a great haul.
Yeah, they probably got another 3 wings, which was another one of those teams similar to the Thunder. You kind of mentioned Johnny Davis. You said he can play alongside Bradley Beal. Do you expect him to play a little point guard at 6'5", or is he kind of more of a swing combo guard?
He's a little bit more of a 2 than he is a 1, but I just don't think it's crazy that they could play alongside each other. Like, they both have enough to be able to kind of share the duties as a handler and facilitator, and I think that they can mesh well together just fine. I wouldn't call him like a point guard by any means, though.
Okay. And then you got like you said, Oklahoma City. They got Jalen Williams, Chet's WCC fellow WCC guy, but Ousmane Dieng, he's probably one of the most interesting guys in the draft. How much New Zealand Breakers did you watch?
Well, I saw a decent amount because of, Ousmane, as well as Hugo Basson, both being French prospects who decided to join the Breakers as part of the NBL Next Stars program. So they warranted watching them a decent bit throughout the year. And it was interesting to just see early on in the season how much Ousmane really struggled and had a tough go of things. And I think there are some multiple factors that go into that, just being such a young kid, moving to a new country by himself, and, just the life adjustment there, first of all, let alone the basketball adjustment to playing in the NBL, which is a really physical, tough league. And he's a young kid, slender frame, just like getting used to that is one thing. But once the season kind of wore on, he really came into his own down the stretch and became a legitimately valuable player for them. Just got more comfortable dealing with the physicality, more confident in his abilities as a creator. And he's just an interesting guy to have, that size, but be able to do some real stuff off the bounce, has some interesting passing chops. And I think that he, again, fits what OKC is trying to do, get these guys with positional size and skill that is a kind of unique combination with the idea of having this just jumbo skill ball lineup down the line. So I thought that both him and Jalen Williams landing there was interesting. Jalen Williams was one of the sharpest risers during the pre-draft process with some pretty absurd measurements at the NBA draft combine. Those just blew everybody away. He tested well athletically. He actually played in the scrimmages and was pretty dominant in those scrimmage games. So you knew he was rising, and there became buzz that there was a chance he would go in the lottery. And I think, jumped the Cleveland Cavaliers were thought to maybe take him at 14, but OKC, made it happen. So, I think that ultimately they're pretty happy with their haul of 3 lottery picks that they ended up with.
Yeah, they traded with the Knicks. I guess I don't know if the Knicks if they're trying to win right now and maybe package some of those picks that they got from OKC and potentially move those on either this summer or next summer. But I don't know. I guess it's like a TBD for the Knicks, right?
A lot of people thought that they might take AJ Griffin with that pick, with him being like CAA guy and all that connecting the dots type stuff, right? But seems like they're taking some sort of patient approach, and they must have something in the works that they're angling toward. But yeah, we'll see where they go with that.
I guess the next guy is probably Agbaji. We talked about Duran a bit, and we both like him fitting on the Pistons. But Agbaji obviously won the championship with Kansas, was probably one of their best players. Were you surprised that he went a little bit early compared to some people's draft boards?
Surprised, especially with Jalen Williams off the board a couple picks earlier. Once Cleveland was on the clock, figured it would probably be Ochai or Malachi Branham. Those are two ends of the spectrum, with Ochai being a senior and Branham being a freshman. But you could understand why Cleveland would have been infatuated with Ochai, like with a winning pedigree. Just kind of got better every year throughout the course of his college career. He shot the ball really well, and I think they need a player like him that's kind of a 3-and-D type wing. I didn't necessarily have a lottery grade on him, but I can see why that Cleveland liked him enough to pick him there. And I think that's one of the things that sort of gets lost in some of these conversations about whether a pick was a reach or not or whatever. We'll probably eventually get to Memphis and talk about how they executed their draft strategy. But usually these teams have 1, 2, maybe 3 picks throughout the course of the draft. And if there's a guy you like, even if it's some sort of perceived 5-spot reach or something, you only have 1 pick in that general area of the draft. So if there's a guy that you like and there's not some, obvious trade back scenario where you can get more assets, those things are harder to execute than you might think. You just got to take the guy that you like. And so I understand Ochai being picked at the tail end of the lottery there.
Yeah, he seems to be like a perfect 3-and-D guy. They were looking for that small forward, even though they traded for LeVert. I think he's a free agent. I'm not sure, but
yeah. I mean, by all accounts, Ochai, is a great high character kid, hard worker, like everything that you would want from an off court perspective too. So when you add that to, again, like the championship pedigree, being a 3-and-D type wing, like there's just a lot to like. And I think he's, ultimately a safe pick to be either, your 4th or 5th starter, or like a 6th man off the bench type that, obviously can stay on the court when you need him. So I think that'll work out just fine.
Yep. We talked about Hornets trading down for Mark Williams. Like we said, it's kind of their preference between him and Jalen Duran. They probably wouldn't have traded Duran if they had Duran higher than Williams on their board. But Yeah. I
And
mean,
Mark Williams' measurements were just pretty mind-boggling at the combine. Like it's obvious that he's a big dude, but when he actually measured at the combine at 7'2" in shoes with a 9'9" standing reach, that's just ridiculous. I think, if you eliminate maybe Taco Fall and Boban from the equation, that might be the highest standing reach in the NBA. And just add that to, I think similarly, he, the off court intel stuff, like really sharp kid, just a lot to like there. So I think he'll do great in Charlotte, and is just, a ready-made starting NBA center that'll be a starting center for a long time.
yeah, you definitely see the value in these guys, like even maybe not, in the lottery, but you've seen guys like Jared Allen and guys like Robert Williams exceed in that role. And then we have AJ Griffin, probably, I think he was rated like top 10, maybe top 15 in his high school class. Had some injury issues, but I feel like the Hawks probably couldn't be happier when they still saw him on the board.
It came as somewhat of a surprise to them that he slid all the way there, but ultimately it's one of those things where I think it's an injury concern type of thing, right? Because he was, one of these super highly touted guys, with maybe the top theoretical NBA prospect in his class 2 years ago, but ended up suffering some injuries, like multiple years of just injury after injury. I don't think any of which were too serious, but when you just kind of compile them onto each other, he clearly has lost a little bit of his burst and athleticism that previously was one of the key things in his toolbox as a projectable NBA prospect. And so, if he's able to kind of move forward and maintain a clean bill of health and get some of that pop back, this could end up being a big value pick when you combine that with, the fact that he was a 45% 3-point shooter at his size and everything, right? Like, as, a young freshman. So that could end up paying dividends down the line. And I think once he slid the whole way to 16, the Hawks basically had to take him at that point. It was just, such potential for surplus value with that pick if it ends up working out.
Yeah. And they're as a pretty solid playoff team, they have the, I guess, capability of taking that risk a little bit. The team that you want to talk about a little bit earlier was Memphis. Even though they didn't really pick in the top 15, they're for Jake Laravia 19, David Roddy at 23, and then Kennedy Chandler at 38. But even Chandler was a pretty touted guy out of high school. But obviously you like their draft. What can you say about that?
Great. And I think what's interesting is with them is that they've kind of shown this the past few years, that if there's a guy that they like, they're kind of willing to trade up a few spots to ensure that they bypass any other team that might have eyes on him and just get the guy that they want, right? Like they're not into playing these games of crossing their fingers and kind of sitting at their pick and hoping. Like if they see an opportunity to ensure that they're going to get the guy that they like, and even if it doesn't necessarily line up with like the consensus rankings or whatever, they go find their guy and they get them. So I think that's pretty commendable that they're willing to do so. They traded up, got Jake Laravia at pick 19, who I think is a really interesting player. I had the chance to sit down with him and break down some game film together a few days before the draft. I think, he's one of these guys that kind of, came out of nowhere in a sense, in that he spent a couple of seasons at Indiana State, transferred up to Wake Forest, just wasn't really, well, being some NBA caliber prospect until he started, performing so well this year at Wake Forest, and then kind of slowly throughout the year rose to being a potential first rounder. And he just kind of checks a lot of boxes that line up with guys that the Grizzlies have historically picked the past few years. Really analytically friendly profile, good positional size, block, a lot of blocks, a lot of steals, like high rates in both of those, as well as, being able to shoot it and play make a little bit. So I think that was an exciting pick. Kennedy Chandler kind of fits that bill with Ty Washington, as like a highly regarded guy coming out of high school that slid a little bit, just because I think ultimately he's a backup point guard, but for Memphis to get him where they did, I think is good value. He's a Memphis native as well, so that's a good, nice story there. Then David Roddy was an interesting one. Draft range was pretty wide, so for them to end up picking him where they did in the first round might be a perceived reach, but he's a really smart player who came into his own as a shooter this year. Kind of has that bowling ball build that can, he can really
kind of looks like a
wall
defensive
you up.
lineman.
Yeah, a really interesting, different kind of build, but I think that's part of what makes him an interesting talent, and I think that it's going to work at the NBA level. And then even the most Memphis out of all of these picks was probably taking Vince Williams with their pick in the 40s, who a lot of people thought would go undrafted. I don't think I saw him mocked just about anywhere, but he's a guy who was invited to the G League Elite Camp and, very analytically friendly profile as well. And I think Memphis just had their eyes on him the whole time. And they figured, hey, this is our last pick of the draft. It's in the second round. Yeah, it's in the 40s. Maybe this guy's consensus rank is in the 70s or whatever, but they weren't going to risk that if they let him go undrafted, that, maybe someone else picks him in the 50s. Maybe he decides to sign an undrafted free agent deal elsewhere for one reason or another. Like, we're just going to go pick our guy. And that's what they did again. So, was impressed with kind of the combination of their evaluations and their sort of strategic execution of their draft.
Yep, definitely. I mean, they probably have one of the best scouting departments and developing, just developing players that they turn into good, useful role players on their team. And most of the guys on their team are, end of first round guys, middle first round guys, besides John, Jaren Jackson, obviously. But another guy that I was yeah, go ahead.
They seem to have a good, good eye for finding these players that, have a clear path to being a valuable role player that kind of complement their stars that they have in place. And John Morant and, Jaren Jackson seems to be potentially ascending to that. Like Desmond Bane, to get him at pick 30, that value is ridiculous, obviously, right? And then they just keep kind of finding these guys that they're able to kind of plug and play, fill a role player, role flanking their stars, and they just kind of stick to their guns and find guys that all have, seem to be good people off the court too. Everyone kind of has a good energy together. They all seem to like each other, right? Like they're building something pretty organically in a way that I think is going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, you can tell how much fun they have playing with each other. It was sad to see Melton leave though, but I think the Sixers got a good one in that trade.
Guy that was definitely part of the initial build for the Grizzlies, and I think they'll always value what he was able to contribute to kickstarting things there. And but they had to move on from him in order to execute some of this draft day strategy we're talking about today. And are able to kind of reset the clock on his contract situation there, and kind of have a guy under a rookie scale deal for a longer period of time now. So it kind of makes sense that they ended up doing that, but I'm sure it is bittersweet for them to part ways with him there.
Yep. Moving on to, some of the guys that I guess maybe you liked or maybe were a little bit higher on than some of these teams at the end of the first or late second. But I did want to talk about Patrick Baldwin, who goes to the Warriors. He was a maybe top 5, top 7 guy coming out of high school. Obviously had a rough year in college playing for his dad. Also got injured, I think, but and he went a little bit higher than I think some people thought. So what'd you think of his fit with the Warriors?
Picking him, I thought it was interesting because they in these past few years kind of had a unique opportunity to add a few lottery talents to their team that was going to kind of inevitably rebound and be a contender again. Once the Klay Thompson injury fully recover, and once they were able to, I think Steph was out for a while too, right? So they were kind of hit the bottom in this unique way where they were going to be able to come back and be contenders again with some youth added to their roster. And people thought they were going to trade away those young talents to acquire another star. They held on to them and still were able to win the title. So I think it's interesting though that in making those picks and James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, like these were all guys that were very highly touted in high school, like some of the top recruits in the country, playing on some of the best teams in the country. And Golden State went and kind of did that again with Patrick Baldwin. And yeah, his freshman season didn't go as you'd like. He was dealing with a foot, ankle injury for most of the season. COVID situation as well. I think other just like family stuff going on that, all kind of melded together to make it be a pretty tough season for him. Didn't perform to his standards and, ultimately did end up sliding. But to get him at the tail end of the first round, I mean, this guy, similar to Mark Williams, his measurements at the combine, I think they kind of caught some people by surprise just how big he actually is. Like he kind of has real center size as well. Didn't test as well athletically as you'd like, but I think the idea is that, he just like has been injured and not playing super regularly throughout the course of the year. Maybe he's able to kind of get back into shape and be a little bit better of an athlete than he tested. But the combination of size, pedigree, and shooting for Golden State to snag him there at the end of the first round, I think that could potentially be a nice pick when it's all said and done. So I kind of liked what they did there. And I think, yeah, some places, were mocking him to slide into the mid-second and things like that. But I think Golden State, does a nice job sometimes of finding guys like, for example, Jordan Poole was thought to be like a mid to late second round pick. They snagged him at the end of the first round. That one worked out pretty well. It's not always hits. They've had their other ones that didn't work out, but Baldwin, I think, is an interesting flyer there at 28.
Yeah, I mean, even in general, even the end of the first, beginning of the second, like your likelihood of a guy becoming a rotational player is not high at all. So you might as well just swing for the fences.
Like a guy that fits a clear roster need and, just makes sense for your team. Like I liked what the Lakers did, buying a pick there from the Magic in the early second round and then drafting Max Christie. I thought that was great. I really liked that move for them. I think Max Christie, similar to Baldwin, some of the statistical profile of his freshman year doesn't necessarily jump off the page. Like Max Christie's known for being a shooter, and yeah, the percentages weren't as good as you'd hope, but he's another guy that I was able to see in person this year. And I would bet almost anything that he ends up being a plus shooter in the NBA when it's all said and done. Like the shot is just too pure to not work out. Like I trust that he's going to be a good shooter. I feel like for me, he was a first round guy. And so for the Lakers to buy that pick and be able to snag him there at 35, like I think that's a great way for them, coming into the draft with no picks to end up with Max Christie in the second round. I think it's great.
Yeah, another team that has done pretty well at the end of the first, beginning of the second, just grabbing rotational guys like Nance and Kuzma and who else was there? Even Caruso, right? I think Caruso was a G League guy actually, but
undrafted guy. But yeah, they've Austin Reeves is another example, right? Like they've done a good job. I think their scouting department does a really nice job of, making the best use of the limited assets that they have available to get the, Taylor Horton Tucker was a second round guy. Like they've done a really nice job with that. And this has the potential to be another hit for them.
Was there any another guy that you liked in the second round? Maybe you can talk about Jaden Hardy. He was another top 10, top to 15 guy coming out of high school. Obviously went to the G League, but he's on a pretty good team with Dallas.
He was thought to be a potential, top 3 pick, maybe even vie for the number 1 spot. Like that, before the season, that's what people thought. And, going to the G League maybe didn't work out as well for him as it did for, Marjon Beauchamp, who's more of a success story from the G League program to have gone from, JUCO last year to being a first round pick. To see Hardy slide the whole way to 37 or wherever he got picked, I think that was surprising. I thought that he would end up being picked in the late first round. So I think that was great value there. And he's going to be playing next to Luka now. And that pairing, could end up making sense. I saw Hardy play in person this year as well, and I understand why he slid from what his standing was previously, right? Like, he just doesn't really have the athletic pop or burst that you would like from an on-ball creator like that. But he has good handle. He's good. He's pretty shifty despite not being, overly athletic, and has really deep shooting range. So, having him next to Luka, I think could make some sense, and they could mesh well together. There could be some synergies there, and Luka could kind of maybe bring the best out of him. So that was a good value pick there, I thought, as well.
Another guy that was kind of slid was EJ Liddell. Some people even had him in the late lottery, like early 20s, but another good landing spot for him, I think.
I had heard a little bit of buzz that he might slide further than you would think, but I was still surprised to see it kind of go that far the whole way to pick 41. But to land with New Orleans, I think it is nice for him. I saw him this year as well, and I was impressed that last year he was the guy who was invited to the G League Elite Camp. Didn't do remarkably last year when he was testing the waters, but I think he was able to take the feedback that he got from NBA teams. And, when I saw him in person this year, his body looked better. He looked a little more fleet of foot. He became a much better rim protector this year. Like, I think he improved in a lot of the areas that he needed to improve in. So I think he's possibly a big second round steal. I had him as a first round guy personally as well. So, I liked that selection once he got that far. I mean, I'm surprised that he made it the whole way to 41.
Yeah. Any undrafted guys that you like? Some notable ones actually, like Johnny Juzang, even Kofi Coburn, some notable guys from college that people who will follow college basketball will definitely have heard of. But anybody like that went undrafted?
I think both of those guys went to the Jazz, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not like particularly high on either of them. But I guess other guys that I do like that went undrafted and have signed these undrafted free agent deals. Let me look through my list right now. I've been tracking all of these pretty meticulously on rookiescale.com. The highest consensus ranked guy that went undrafted was Justin Lewis out of Marquette. Sophomore forward. The Chicago Bulls ended up inking him to a two-way contract. So, that could be a good one for Chicago. Darion Sebron to New Orleans on a two-way contract. He's a guy I also had the chance to break down some game film with recently. He was kind of a late bloomer onto the prospect radar as well, in that he was a redshirt sophomore this year that didn't really do much as a freshman, and then just kind of exploded this year as a tenacious rebounder for his position, gets downhill, probably, one of the best guys aside from Jaden Ivey, in this class at just getting downhill and relentlessly attacking the rim. So that's an interesting pickup for New Orleans as well. John out of Overtime Elite. A lot of people probably haven't seen him because, he played for Overtime Elite and just maybe people aren't as familiar, but I like that pickup for San Antonio. So again, like San Antonio add him in with those 3 one and done guys that we talked about before. So I think they did great. Who else undrafted did I like? I would say Julian Champagnie to the 76ers is an interesting pickup as well. His brother is in the Toronto Raptors system as like a two-way guy. So he's a guy who's a junior this year for St. John's, one of the top scorers in the Big East, and he's young for a junior. He's the age of a lot of sophomores. So, as an undrafted two-way guy for Philly to snag him, I thought that was nice as well.
I guess the last guy I want to ask about is Michael Foster, another G League guy. I mean, looks like he averaged like 14 and 8 rebounds per game. Is he just a little bit slow for the NBA?
I think maybe part of it, right? I wasn't very high on Michael Foster, particularly early in the year. When I went and saw him, he had a really productive game in the game that I was at, but it just looked like he was maybe carrying a little extra weight. Didn't really see exactly how it would translate because he was effectively a center that wasn't, the most fleet of foot, like wasn't like a defense oriented center, right? So I was unsure of exactly what the idea was for him, but I will say that he kind of grew on me over the course of the year. Ended up liking him a little more than I originally thought. I thought he would get drafted in the second round. And I was really impressed when I was at these agency pro days in Chicago to see how much he had clearly improved his body. Like, I think he was more around probably 250 throughout a lot of the course of the season, but he worked his way down to closer to 235 and looked actually pretty shredded up when I saw him in person. So I don't know. I think he also went to Philly. So I think that was another, interesting undrafted free agent pickup that we'll see how it shakes out if he ends up. I'm not sure what kind of contract he had. The reporting was a little bit less clear there on if it was an Exhibit 10 or just for summer league or what the deal is. But, I understand why maybe, the translation wasn't super clear at first, but I think maybe I'm a little bit higher on him than, what his undrafted status ended up being, which is surprising to myself based on where I was early in the season and he grew on me.
Yeah, man, you've given us a lot of information. I'm excited for Summer League just to see all these guys play, especially that first game. I think it's Orlando versus Houston, at least the first game in Vegas. So that should be an exciting one.
On the NBA, tries to schedule some of the top picks to get pitted against each other. Especially that one is fun because the players are on the opposite teams of what everyone was projecting them to be with Jabari and Paolo. So that should definitely be a fun game between two teams that are kind of loading themselves up with young talent. So definitely looking forward to that and all the other action at Summer League.
Yep, definitely follow Jon on Twitter. You also have the rookie scale. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Jon Chep. That's JONCHEP. And then Rookie Scale is my website and company. You can check out rookiescale.com. The most notable thing up there right now is that I have an undrafted free agency tracker that I think you'll find to be the most complete and thorough one out there. Super detailed and granular, sortable. I think it's a pretty good resource for anybody that's interested in kind of keeping tab on two ways, Exhibit 10, Summer League deals, things like that. So you can follow Rookie Scale. It's at Rookie Scale. Same thing on Twitter and Instagram. So go take a look.
All right, man. Thanks for joining me. Maybe we can talk after Summer League, see who stood out from Summer League. But thanks for joining me. Have a good summer, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.